Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Nioh, The World Ends With You. I played on the PS5 via backwards compatibility. It's also available on the Nintendo Switch and PS4. Sorry this is coming up so late, but I got really busy and then I didn't have enough time, so I just took some extra time to review it. Plus, I kind of forgot how big the World Ends With You games actually are. Not that there's a ton of games, but they're much bigger than you might anticipate. So let's start with the story. You play as Rindo and his friend Fret, and you are hanging out in Shibuya when some weird shit starts happening. You guys get pulled into the UG to participate in the Reapers game, which is kind of this parallel universe, and there's these groups called the Reapers, there's these monsters called the Noise, and then there's the players. And this one's a little different than the original. This time it's about teams rather than pairs of players, and the goal is for each team to climb their way to the top, and then they get basically a wish granted, and it's not really clear what that wish can or cannot be. The current winners, the Ruinbringers, keep wishing for the game to continue, but the losers get erased. They disappear. So there are some pretty serious stakes, and the story takes some awesome and really interesting turns. You get to meet a bunch of different characters with some weird but unique and fun personalities. And the story really evolves with the new characters. The story is really good, and it's a lot more than you might anticipate originally. Having played the original on the DS, I had forgotten how much there was to the game story-wise, and how much further it goes than you might anticipate. I really enjoyed the story, and I liked the characters. I like where it goes. I don't want to say too much more beyond that. Now, as for the audio, I'm gonna say this. I like the voiceover work. I think it's pretty well done. Honestly, I don't have any real complaints with anybody. I'm trying to think about it, but I'm pretty happy with the voiceover work. I like the music for the most part. I think some of it's hit or miss, but I think overall it works. But some of it does get repetitive in the combat. I think there's like maybe 3 or 4 songs that play in any and all of the combat scenarios, and one of them, it plays during like the first week. That's the only song you hear, and then it goes away, and then you hear like maybe 2 or 3 other songs in every combat situation for the rest of the game, it feels like. So that did get a little annoying. I do like the music when you're running around though. I think it works. As for the sound effects, I think they work well. This is an anime style game. They are anime and over-the-top sound effects. I think it goes well with the style. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is an action RPG. And the combat is fairly unique, but I will say it does get a bit repetitive, so we'll start there. In the combat, each of your characters gets a pin, and that pin gives them a specific attack, and each of them can only have 1 pin. And each of those pins are tied to a specific button on the controller. R2, L2, triangle, square, L1, and R1 are the buttons you go to. And it's a good idea to pair them up and, you figure out a pattern, you figure out how you want to run it, and then you basically just run it that way, and that starts to get a bit repetitive. I mean, honestly, more than a bit repetitive, it just flat out does get repetitive. So I do feel like that is a bit of a detractor from this game, but I will say that it works well, and it's actually a pretty cool system because you can mix and match the pins, you can play around with it a lot, but I don't know, I found something that worked and I really just stuck with that. And I think it's very easy to do that because you end up with pins that are really useful, and then you end up with some where they're not useful. But let's get into the rest of the gameplay stuff. It's not really an open world. You go from zone to zone, and you are given missions in this Reaper game, and your goal is basically to complete those missions. Some of them is beating Noise, some of them is fighting other players, which aren't real players, they are still NPCs. But it is very mission to mission. There are some side missions. There is shopping for pins, shopping for clothing, buying food, things that will upgrade you. Another thing that ties into combat that I actually really like and thought was a cool and unique feature is you can chain enemies together. So when you're running around in the world, you just see these enemy icons floating around, and what you do is you go and basically trigger them, they will follow you, and you can trigger multiple ones of them to come to you, so you chain it into this longer battle. So if you chain 10 of them together, it's 10 battles rather than doing it, individually. Which is beneficial to you because it will give you more XP, it will give you more rewards, but it can be, dangerous for you at the same time. It's a risk-reward system. The longer the battle goes on, the more likely you are to lose. I think they do a good job tying it into this weird and unique story and building a combat system that fits it. There are also some interesting gameplay elements, like each of the players gets their own psych, which in the case of Fret, like if you need to solve a puzzle, he can remind people by creating these horrible little drawings, but it triggers a memory in that individual, which then, allows you to complete the puzzle. So I think they did some cool things with that. They made each of the characters unique and tied it into gameplay, and I think that's kind of what you want in games. Now let's get into the controls. As I said, combat, each of the attacks is tied to a specific button based on the pin you've attached, and it works. They respond. They respond very well. I didn't have any complaints with that. It does get a little nuts because there are times where you're like sitting there, got like 4 buttons down, got 4 attacks going, you're tapping some, you're holding some. It gets a little nuts, but I think it works. As for the movement and camera control, I found that to be very responsive. I didn't have any complaints with it. Just overall, control standpoint, I think it's a good, solid game. Now let's get into the graphics and visuals, and it's very much an anime style. It does do one thing that I am going to complain about a bit, where it does the still frames of people talking to each other rather than just having cutscenes. The game does a little bit of mix and match with that, but it's like 99% is those still frames, and occasionally you get a little bit of a cutscene. So I think that works a little bit better than when you mix and match at a different percentage. And it's got this anime style that I just love. I think it really works, and the way the world kind of moves, it does move as you are moving through it, is weird and trippy, but it works with the situation really, really well. But going beyond that, I love the characters, I love the creatures. I think they're all really uniquely designed. They may fit some stereotypes or archetypes, whatever you want to say, but I think the characters have a cool design. I love the way they work. They fit into the world. And when it comes to the creatures are really uniquely designed. It's not super easy to describe them. They look sort of like regular animals, but with these weird tribal tattoo looking limbs, and I don't mean that their limbs have tribal tattoos on them. I mean their limbs are made up of a tribal tattoo. And it's just it's a cool and unique and interesting style. Also, it's a very bright and beautiful game. They absolutely could have used the excuse of dragging you into the UG as oh, it's all grim and it's all browns and grays and blah blah blah. But they didn't. It's still a very bright and colorful world, and the monsters are bright and colorful, the clothes are bright and colorful. It's a cool design, it's a really good aesthetic, I like it. So to wrap this up, I'm gonna say that this game is totally worth it. It's a huge game, there's a lot to do. The combat and the music are a bit of a detractor. It works well enough, despite the fact it does get monotonous, that you still want to continue going forward in the game. So to put it simply, I recommend this game. I had a really good time with it. I liked the first game on the DS. I really enjoyed this game as well. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, did you play The World Ends With You on the DS? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.